আমার একটা চিরদিনের ভালো লাগার কবিতা আছে। আমার মনে হয় অনেকের কাছে এই কবিতাটি আমার মতোই চিরদিনের প্রিয়। কবির একটা জিজ্ঞাসা আছে ঈশ্বরের কাছে, আমাদেরও কিন্তু আছে সেই একই জিজ্ঞাসা। এখন মনের কথা আমরা তো গুছিয়ে বলতে পারি না, কবি আমাদের হয়ে খুব সুন্দর করে সেই জিজ্ঞাসাটা তুলে ধরছেন কবিতার মধ্যে দিয়ে। মনে হয় কবি এই জিজ্ঞাসার যথার্থ উত্তর নিজেও বোধহয় খুঁজে পাননি, আর আমরা তো আজও সেই উত্তর খুঁজে মরছি। প্রশ্ন: ভগবান, তুমি যুগে যুগে দূত পাঠায়েছ বারে বারে দয়াহীন সংসারে। তারা বলে গেল ক্ষমা করো সবে, বলে গেল ভালোবাসো, অন্তর হতে বিদ্বেষ বিষ নাশো। বরণেও তারা, স্মরণেও তারা, তবুও বাহির দ্বারে আজি দুর্দিনে ফিরানো তাদের ব্যর্থ নমস্কারে। আমি যে দেখেছি গোপন হিংসা কপট রাত্রি ছায়ে হেনেছে নিঃসহায়ে। আমি যে দেখেছি প্রতিকারহীন শক্তের অপরাধে বিচারের বাণী নীরবে নিভৃতে কাঁদে। আমি যে দেখিনু তরুণ বালক উন্মাদ হয়ে ছুটে কি যন্ত্রণায় মরেছে পাথরে নিষ্ফল মাথা কুটে। কণ্ঠ আমার রুদ্ধ আজিকে বাঁশি সঙ্গীত হারা, অমাবস্যার কারা লুপ্ত করেছে আমার ভুবন দুঃস্বপনের তলে। তাই তো তোমায় শুধাই অশ্রু জলে, যাহারা তোমার বিষাইছে বায়ু নিভাইছে তব আলো। তুমি কি তাদের ক্ষমা করিয়াছ? তুমি কি বেসেছ ভালো? Query: My God, age after age, time and time again, you have designed to send your messengers upon this lovely earth. They have preached, forgive them all. They have said, give them your love, root out the poison of hate from your heart. Worthy of homage they are, worthy of remembrance they are. Yet, on this evil day, with thankless salutation, from the outer door I have turned them away. Because I have seen the weak stricken by treacherous hatred under deceitful cover of night. Because I have seen the voice of justice weep in silence and aside for the strong's unremedied crime. Because I have seen tender youths in frenzy strike their heads against stone and go to death in vain. Stifled is my voice today, my flute has lost its song, and my world swallowed up in a nightmare by the dark night's prison. My God, oh my God, I ask you in tears, those that are poisoning your air, those that are putting out your light, have you given them your love? Have you forgiven them all?
Good evening. That was a Tagore recitation by Krishna Bose done in 2015 of what she calls her single most favorite Tagore poem, which Rabindranath composed in 1931 at a politically very tumultuous time in our country during a key juncture of the anti-colonial struggle. When Dr. Shishir Bose established the Netaji Research Bureau in this historic house more than 6 decades ago, the house dedicated some years before that, in 1946, 1947, to the nation and named Netaji Bhavan by none other than Sharad Bose. Shishir Bose founded Netaji Research Bureau as an institute of history, politics, and international relations. And that's the title it bears to this day. So it was not just about history, but about politics and international relations as well. Of course, the core mission of Netaji Research Bureau remains the preservation and the propagation of the best values of the Indian freedom movement, as epitomized above all in the life of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. However, Shishir Bose always felt that Netaji Bhavan should also provide a venue and a platform for the discussion of contemporary issues, and especially the burning issues and problems of our country. So it is in that spirit that this symposium has been organized today. Today, of course, is Krishna Bose's 95th birth anniversary. Krishna Bose grew up during a very tumultuous time, the 1940s. She came of age as an eyewitness, and a very sensitive and engaged eyewitness, to such events as the Quit India movement, the Bengal famine, the Red Fort trials of the INA officers, the great Calcutta killings that convulsed this city in August 1946, and, of course, the dawn of independence amid partition a year later in August 1947, which she witnessed not in Calcutta but in Delhi, where she happened to be at the time. Many decades later, Krishna Bose had a life in politics that lasted about a decade. After 3 consecutive terms in the Lok Sabha, she decided to step away from partisan politics. That's politics in the narrow sense of the term. She decided she'd had enough. But she never removed herself from politics and the political in the broader and in the deeper sense. When Mama was first elected to the Lok Sabha, I was a PhD student in political science at Columbia University. And when she ran for the last time for the Lok Sabha, I was a professional academic teaching comparative politics and political science at the London School of Economics. A decade or so separated those two time periods. I was, as a full-time student and a scholar of politics in its varied forms and manifestations, I was always struck by how much my mother gained from her decade-long stint as an outsider in politics, as she called her autobiography, her memoir rather, of her life in active partisan politics. It's a fairly well-known book. It's called An Outsider in Politics. It was published first in English in 2008. The paperback came out in 2015, and then in its Bengali version, Parliamented Ondor Mahole, inside the halls of Parliament in 2009. Mama lived for about a decade and a half after she stepped aside or stepped away from politics in that narrow sense, partisan politics. But I noticed, and I was amazed, that she took so much from that decade that she spent in active politics as a parliamentarian, as the chairperson of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs, and so on. For the decade and a half that she lived, until 2020, until about 5.5 years ago, she wrote numerous political commentaries, unfortunately mostly in Bengali, but some in English as well, which drew on her experience as an active politician. And she wrote so penetratingly and with such insight, such prescience, such calm wisdom on most of the political issues that face our country today. Fortunately, we have that decade and a half of political articles and essays published as a very important part of an omnibus anthology in Bengali published 4 years ago by Anando Publishers, Krishna Bose Prabandha Sangraha. It's a collection of more than 100 of her articles and essays, including her articles and essays in her later life on political themes and subjects. But it's a compendium of more than 100 articles and essays published between 1951 and 2020. So I suspect Mama would be rather pleased to see this from up there, to see this political, to see the symposium being held here today, because I think she always was latently, and certainly in her mature years, in her more advanced years, she became an intensely political person in the very deep and best sense of that term. Until literally the last day of her life in February 2020, she was keenly interested in what was going on in this city, in this state, in this country, and indeed around the world. So this symposium is a tribute to her memory, 5.5 years after her passing. Most of you know that we've had lectures in the past. The inaugural Krishna Bose lecture was given on December 26, 2020 by Gayatri Spivak. Last year, we inaugurated a very successful exhibition of modern art by 20th century Bengali masters in commemoration of her 94th birth anniversary. And this year, we've decided to do something a little different, a discussion of India's democracy, its condition, and its prospects in the near term. We have two guests here today. We have Ghazala Wahab, who has just published a few months ago this very interesting book, a very instructive volume called The Hindi Heartland, a study. Ghazala is a journalist and an editor, but she is also an author of significant books. Not just The Hindi Heartland, but a few years ago she published a rather well-known book called Born a Muslim, Some Truths About Islam in India, that came out in 2021, I think, if I'm not getting it wrong. And along with Ghazala, we are very pleased to welcome Debasish Roy Chowdhury. Debasish, of course, is a well-known journalist, columnist, and commentator whose incisive pieces on Indian politics at its current conjuncture appear in a variety of international outlets. But he has also written a significant book, which he co-authored with the scholar, the political theorist, John Keane. And that came out in 2021 as well. And it's titled To Kill a Democracy, India's Passage to Despotism. I'm going to act as the compare of the discussion to follow in the next hour. I'll also interject some of my own 2 cents worth in the process. But I wanted to start with you, Ghazala. The reason I was so intrigued by your very detailed study of the Hindi heartland, its society, its culture, and its politics, is, of course, that the Hindi heartland lies at the heart of our political predicament today. The single-party majorities of 2014 and 2019 were, of course, enabled, propelled, powered by sweeps or near sweeps in practically all the states of the Hindi heartland. The loss of the single-party majority in 2024 was due to a reverse in Maharashtra as well, in the west, but principally in Uttar Pradesh. But the ruling party at the center largely held its own in the rest of the Hindi heartland. And of course, very recently, just last month, we have the example of a very important, in the sense of bellwether heartland state, which is Bihar, which witnessed what turned out eventually to be a very one-sided contest and result. One of the points, Ghazala, that you make in this book is that the brand of religious majoritarian politics that seems to have become entrenched and dominant across this vast swathe of our country called the Hindi heartland in shorthand has a long lineage. It's always been there as a significant element, a very significant element of the culture, the society, and the politics of the Hindi heartland states, although it didn't have the kind of dominance that it has achieved, at least for the time being, in the last 10 to 11 years. Would you care to elaborate a little on the long lineage, the pedigree of religious majoritarian politics in the Hindi heartland?
Thank you so much, Professor Bose. Okay, so now my voice is clear. Basically, since the Bharatiya Jan Sangh came into existence, they raised the bogey of Muslim vote bank. And all the attention of political parties, including the Congress party, which was the main party at that time, was on dispelling this idea, because Congress was supposed to be, or was accused of pandering to the Muslim vote bank. So a lot of energy was invested in first creating the idea of a Muslim vote bank and then dispelling that a Muslim vote bank exists. But below the radar, all this while, a Hindu vote bank was being consolidated, largely by the efforts of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which was the organization which paved the ground for first the Bharatiya Jan Sangh and subsequently the BJP, Bharatiya Janata Party. So all this while we were watching out for a Muslim vote bank, a Hindu vote bank was being created. Now, the consequence of that has been that whenever there was a Muslim contender in any parliamentary seat or even assembly seats in the Hindi heartland, the Hindu vote used to consolidate against him. So parties realized that it makes no sense fielding a Muslim candidate, because even the Muslims won't vote for him because they would feel that he's a losing candidate, he will not win. So gradually, over a period of time, the Muslim, not only the participants in democratic processes, participants in electoral processes were rendered redundant. The Muslim votes were also rendered redundant because they didn't matter. They were not important enough for a candidate to win or lose. Contrary to the belief that which we've held until 2014, that Muslims vote en masse, and this person in Jama Masjid in Delhi, he issues a fatwa, the Bukharis, Imam Bukhari, and so on, and they say, oh, so this year you vote for this party, and Muslims en masse would go and vote for that party. That was a myth. They were not doing that. So because of this, because our attention was on a different challenge which actually did not exist, we did not see how, since the 1950s onwards, the RSS had been making its inroads in the Hindi heartland. You mentioned Bihar towards the end. If we recall, one of the worst violence, pre-partition and post-partition violence in the Hindi heartland happened in Bihar. And even after partition, the worst communal riots, which resulted in mass killing, has been Bihar, whether it was Ranchi or Jamshedpur or Bhagalpur. No other part of the Hindi heartland has seen that level of mass violence in which the ruling dispensation, the law enforcement agencies were all complicit to a very large extent. So this has been possible because of the ground which the RSS paved, whether it was through raising the bogies of Ram Navami yatras or Shilanyas yatras, much before the Ram Mandir temple campaign took off in the 1980s. They used to carry out small shilanyas for some temple or other, and every time a yatra would happen, it would result in violence. So all of this was the learning which Hegdewar learnt in the 1930s in Maharashtra, Nagpur. So we did not pay attention to this because we were so worried about, after partition especially, about Muslims consolidating and then acting as the fifth columnist in the country, that we did not see this happening. So this majoritarian politics today, after 2014 that we witness now, this grand sweep that the BJP is able to achieve, both in the state assembly elections in Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, now Bihar and UP earlier, as well as in the parliamentary elections, is because there is a consolidated vote bank which is only getting strengthened by the day. And the biggest worry is that this is neither representative of the population of this region, because the upper caste Hindu is not a majority except in Uttarakhand where they are a majority. Everywhere else they are very small minority, but they dominate not only the politics of this state, they dominate the law enforcement in this state, the law making in these states, as well as the popular narrative which creates or which helps consolidate the vote bank. So they dominate all aspects of the society.
Right. I've always believed that the ultimate example of so-called quote-unquote vote bank politics is the majoritarian vote bank politics, which of course bloomed fully during the Ram Janmabhoomi movement in the early 1990s. But I think you did use the word complicity, once.
Yes.
And for example, the exchange of letters between Prime Minister Nehru and Chief Minister Govind Ballabh Pant of the United Provinces, as it was still known then, it was still not Uttar Pradesh, is very revealing.
Yes.
That how pusillanimous Nehru is in the face of what Pant and various others who are essentially prone to Hindu majoritarian views, as well as Hindi linguistic chauvinism, which is very anti-Urdu as well, are up to. And that was December 1949 when the Ayodhya dispute properly kicked off. And 40 years later, exactly, in November 1989, Nehru's grandson and political successor covered himself in glory by permitting the Shilanyas done by the VHP, by Ashok Singhal and his men at the disputed site. So it was actually, I think, not just the RSS or the Janasangh, as committed as they were, because during these decades, the Janasangh was a smallish party, very dedicated, very active in certain urban centers, with a base among certain petty bourgeois groups especially. But it wasn't really a formidable mass party. But its agenda was enabled by those in power, and especially the party that was India's dominant party. It's how times have changed from independence until the end of the 1980s. Debashish, I wanted to come to you next. Debashish's book, by the way, is available outside the auditorium for anyone who's interested. One of the major points, which I think is incredibly important, that you and John Keane make in your co-authored book, is that what you term India's passage to despotism hasn't happened overnight. that there is a long back story, and that the political situation that has been apparent in the country at large since 2014 is in many ways a symptom of a much deeper malaise, or malaises, to use the plural. And in fact, the situation since 2014 can be regarded as a consequence or effect of those deeper malaises, rather than the cause of something. So would you care to elaborate on that, the backstory of the situation since 2014?
Yes, sure. Can you hear me?
আরেকটু বোধহয় মুখের কাছে নিয়ে বললে ভালো হয়।
Yeah. Firstly, thank you for this opportunity to be here, and thank you all of you for coming here. And I would particularly like to thank both of you for thinking about me, because this is a very special day for me. The reason being that this has been my place of annual pilgrimage from since the time I was in class 6 or 7. I think the first time my father brought me here was on the 23rd of January, which is Netaji's birthday. I guess part of his character building efforts for me, and that became a habit for me to come here every year. I think for the rest of the time that I was in Calcutta, most years. So it's a very special day for me to be here and speak about democracy. I often wonder what Netaji would make of our democracy if he were around today. Coming to your question, Sumantra, we look at the book. In our book, if you read the book, you will see that we approach the decline of democracy in the traditional manner, as you look at institutions, how institutions decline, like the judiciary, the legislature, or the political party system, elections, media. But we also look at something what we called the social foundations of democracy. The social foundations of democracy are basically the social lives in which people live, and we look at them because the institutions or the upper institutions of democracy, the governing institutions, they rest on and they draw their legitimacy from the social foundations of democracy. And social foundations are basically, or the components of social foundations are things like education, health, even simple things like the ground, the air, water. So basically all, or the access to all of these, which make for dignified life. And one of the fallacies that we find in our democracy is that we set out to build a social democracy. We called ourselves a socialist country, or we put it on our constitution, but we never really built a welfare state which bedrocks all social democracies in the North Atlantic region. So we built a democracy, we built a social democracy without a welfare state. And as a result, we did not universalize education, we did not universalize healthcare, and we did not, of course, we did not create enough jobs, or we did not conduct decent land reforms, which is very important for the economic progress of any country. All over the, not just in the North Atlantic countries, actually more than in the North Atlantic countries, all the countries in Asia that we have sought to emulate, be it Japan, be it the Southeast Asian countries, be it China. Um, land reforms, the land distribution was one of the first things that these governments did before they set out on their journey of development. We did none of that, and we attempted this creation of social democracy, and here we are. So what happens is when your social foundations are weak and people do not have dignified life, it delegitimizes the political or the governing institutions. People lose faith in the institutions or that govern them, and that creates a ground for demagogues, people who will come along and promise the moon, and people by that time, they are not looking for, I think one of the major problems of our representative democracy is that we do not really look for representatives, we almost look for saviors, we look for messiahs. And a messiah in the form of Narendra Modi came along, and we went with him, and here we are.
I think that's an incredibly important insight. So political democracy without not just social transformation, transformation is a big word to use, but for many decades after independence, really without any meaningful social change or social progress or social reform, how you call it, however you call it, has perhaps laid the seeds of the situation that we find ourselves in today. I have a book coming out next year. It's done. I have unlike Ghazala or Debasish, I don't have the book, but I have its cover, which some of you can see. It's called The Modi Era, India and the Story of a Democracy in Eclipse. And, of course, my central task in this book is to explain the Modi era. Since 2014, end of 2025, it's still ongoing, despite the stumble last year, year and a half ago. In trying to explain the Modi era and its relative longevity, I kept coming back to one explanatory factor, or one causal factor, which, in fact, didn't have anything to do directly with Modi or the BJP or the Sangh Parivar, or what they're doing right in the sense of effective, but with the worthlessness of the spectrum of the Indian political opposition. That, to me, is the crucial explanatory factor in accounting for the Modi era. My mother, by the way, one of the lessons she acquired from her innings in politics is that a strong democracy depends crucially on a strong opposition. It's the opposition that is the lifeblood of a democracy. And if there is a key missing element in Indian democracy today, which explains much of its present condition, and I have to add likely near-term prospects, it's the absence of that strong, effective opposition, the lifeblood of democracy. Instead, the political opposition is leaderless, unlike the BJP, which is not leaderless. It is rudderless, ideologically and programmatically, unlike the BJP and its wider movement, the Sangh Parivar, which is not rudderless at all. We have a very disparate opposition. Sometimes having a rainbow opposition can be an asset or even an advantage, but here it seems to have the opposite consequence. It's disparate and it's very fragmented. Okay. So you have an emaciated Congress party, which is barely a shadow of what it was in its heyday, and you have this gaggle of so-called regional parties, which I prefer nowadays to call one-state parties, which some of which are non-aligned, some of which are actually allies of BJP, but a good number of others are for various reasons, more circumstantial perhaps than others, in the anti-BJP camp. I wanted to start here with Sugata Bose and come in reverse order, because he has been a practitioner in politics. It's a compound question. What ails the Indian opposition, and can it be fixed? That's the compound question. What ails the Indian opposition, and can it be fixed?
Well, let me begin by saying that when I entered parliamentary politics, I did so, of course, inspired by my mother. And in 2014, I was elected to the 16th Lok Sabha. I still remember that the opposition was completely demoralized the day that I rose to deliver my first speech in Parliament. It was early June of 2014. I first spoke in the Lok Sabha on the same day as Narendra Modi. And at the end of that session, he came up to me and said that I'm also a first-term MP. What struck me immediately was the religious majoritarianism that had undercut the representativeness of the Lok Sabha. In fact, I still remember saying that the 16th Lok Sabha is not as representative as it should be. And what I had in mind, of course, as I looked at the serried ranks of the Treasury benches, that from UP, our largest state, which had sent 80 members of the Lok Sabha, there was not one Muslim. And therefore, I gave a kind of a cop-out solution that some of us have to give voice to the unrepresented. But that is not really a democratic resolution of the problem. Halfway through the 16th Lok Sabha, there was a by-election, and a Muslim woman did get elected. But in a state where Muslims consist of 18% of the population, not to have a single representative in the Lok Sabha, I think puts our democracy in very, very poor light. You know, so far we have emphasized religious majoritarianism as the key element which undermines the quality of our democracy. But there is, of course, something else too, and that is centralized authoritarianism. And if we are to fully understand the danger posed by centralized authoritarianism, we have to look into the past. We cannot simply put the entire blame on either the RSS or the Bharatiya Janasangh, which later became the Bharatiya Janata Party. Unfortunately, we inherited many of the states of exception that were part of colonial authoritarianism. And that is why one of the problems with the opposition, and particularly the principal opposition party, even though I don't even know whether we can call it that, the Indian National Congress, it relies on a if I want to put it strongly, on a liberal lie about the early decades of India's independence. And there is no honest intellectual reckoning of how some of the best ideas about democracy and federalism that had animated our freedom struggle, the ideas that had been propagated by leaders like Deshabandhu Chittaranjan Das and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, lost out during the post-colonial transition. And it happened during decades of Congress hegemony. And that, I believe, is a real problem. There were certain dissenters, or the rebels, even in the Constituent Assembly, who had a different vision. K.T. Shah, a follower of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, or a Hari Vishnu Kamath. K.T. Shah wanted to amend Article 1 of our Constitution to say that India is a secular, federal, and socialist union of states. But those who were truer to the values of the freedom struggle, their voices were not heard. All of their far-sighted amendments were negatived. And we basically adopted the features of a colonial constitution with some lip service to, social welfare, but those directive principles really didn't amount to very much. And so the brief answer to the problem that we, face today is that we don't have a second India-wide opposition party. If the Congress were to have a future, it would have to reinvent itself as a federal party. But it's probably not able to do that because it is the Congress which had promoted over-centralization of the state structure, and what is more, from the early 1970s, the party itself became too top-heavy, dynastic, over-centralized, with, popular leaders at the state level not being able to make any advances within the party. And then the other difficulty with the opposition is that the regional parties, as Sumantra has said, have all become one-state parties. Now, federalism is not just about trying to defend the autonomy of the states. That is one aspect of it. We really ought to, stand up for regional, autonomy in many respects. But a genuine federalism in India would mean renegotiating the power equation at the central or the federal level. And this, I think, one-state parties have been not been able to even come close to. So we don't have a credible federal alternative to the centralized authoritarianism over which the Bharatiya Janata Party is presiding at this moment. So I don't have any easy, answers at the level of pragmatic politics. But the principles, I think, that we have to aspire towards are, clear enough. We have had a robust anti-colonial political and intellectual tradition of constitutionalism and federalism, which is very different from the text of the Constitution that we have taken largely from our colonial past. So we have the resources in our history, but the current configuration of political forces does not allow me to be too optimistic about the near-term future. But the values and the principles, I think, can be identified, and that may provide some kind of a silver lining on a future horizon.
Right, 3 points very quickly. before I yield to Debashish. Debashish posed a question in passing, how Netaji would have felt today. I think he would be turning in his grave. Because he personified, he represented and he personified what I might call, it's a term, radical secularism. He believed that Indian national identity must transcend all religious identities, that it should not be a mishmash, sarva dharma sambhava, or based on a spirit and narrative of religious syncretism and so on. All that is fine, that's part of our culture. But he felt strongly and he practiced what he preached. He tried to implement his ideas that Indian national identity must transcend, it must stand above, all religious identities. On the issue of Muslim representation, we all know that the ruling party at the center doesn't nominate any Muslim candidates except very rarely. Even during the first NDA, 1998 to 2004, there were a handful of Muslim BJP faces, one or two of whom were accommodated in the ministry. But even that tokenism has been done away with, which is not necessarily a bad thing, in the sense that there is no hypocrisy anymore. It's quite open. Of the 446 Lok Sabha candidates the BJP ran last year, of 543, the rest, its allies ran candidates in, the small parties, which eventually propped up its current government. There was only one Muslim candidate of the 446, and this was a man who ran from the Malappuram constituency in Kerala, in Malabar, and he got 8% of the votes, and he came fourth or fifth or something like that. But to go back to the opposition and why it is like this, it's aggravating the problem. Rather, it seems to be a part of the problem rather than part of the resolution. Both the Congress and the one-state parties like the SP in Uttar Pradesh, the Trinamool Congress in West Bengal, have been cutting down on Muslim candidates in both state-level elections and national elections. And the Congress as well, in a copycat version. So, so it's having an effect beyond the Modi-Shah BJP's own practices. It seems to be percolating across the political spectrum and making a problem of representation worse than it is. Another case of complicity, if you will. And one last point, very quickly, the third point about the opposition today, before I give it to Debashish and then to Ghazala, is that Modi accuses both the Congress, which is at best a multi-state party, half a dozen states, that's it. It's not a one-state party, but it's half a dozen states maximum, and mostly smaller states. The only state I have come across recently where the Congress still has a formidable presence is Karnataka. Okay, and that's an exception because it still has an organizational structure. It has credible leaders who are, of course, squabbling with each other. But that's a hallowed Congress tradition of factionalism and jockeying for power. And then you have the one-state parties, and Modi routinely accuses both the Congress and the range of one-state parties, the ones that are opposed to him, for circumstantial reasons rather than ideological, I suspect, for the most part, of three vices. One is parivarvad, being private limited family firms. Okay? Second is bhrishtachar, of being breeding grounds of appalling levels of corruption, especially where these parties have been or currently are in power in certain states. And thirdly, tushtikaran, which is more contentious, but the appeasement of Muslims, the minority vote bank politics. But I have to say, as a as an observer and a scholar of Indian politics, that there is very substantial truth to the first two accusations of Parivarvad and Bhrishtachar. And of course, and I think this is perhaps an unpopular thing to say, that there is some truth to the third accusation also, so of Tushtikaran. But I'll give it to Debasish at that point. What can be done, if anything, about the Indian opposition?
My big problem with the opposition is that I think it doesn't have any conviction. So this is, in retrospect, I feel that this is a chapter that we should have included in my book, because we looked at different institutions, the judiciary, the legislature, the election system, etc., media, everything. But we did not look at the role of political parties themselves as an institution. And what we have seen in the last 10 years is a complete disarray and decay of political parties, the opposition parties as an institution. And this is very important in understanding the decay of democracy in India. And I recently wrote, I don't know if you have read it, Sumantra or any of you here, I did a piece on the lessons of Mamdani's victory in New York.
I've read it.
What the lessons it holds for, what lessons it holds for Indian opposition. And the thing that struck me is that here is a man who, when everybody in the world thought that the US public opinion, political opinion had moved to the right, or he stood by his conviction and he ran on it, and he never compromised on his conviction, and he did basically everything that a political consultant would advise against, right? Supporting Palestine, speaking about socialism, and he ran with it, and his conviction showed that public opinion is not a monolith. Everything does not right, left, and or right. I find Indian political parties, or they lack this conviction. When it comes to the Muslim question, for example, they have been in two minds. I mean, when you see reports of Muslim lynching or savaging of Muslim communities, you will never find the opposition there, right? One classic example was the Delhi riots. Before the riots, for 2 weeks leading up to the riots, everybody saw it coming, right? The neighborhoods were tense, there was mobilization. In the India that I grew up, you would expect political parties, secular parties, taking their cadres to the neighborhood and organizing community dialogues. All the political parties, the Congress, the CPM, the Samajwadi Party, all of them, all their leaders, they live in Delhi. But you never saw any of them going there to the ground and talking to the people and trying to mediate. So this is a major problem, but the fundamental problem I find with the political parties, and here there is a serious need for dialogue, because we need to obviously go back to the drawing board, things are so bad, is that the reason why Mamdani made it to the ticket in the first place was because there is internal democracy within the political parties in the US. Because the political elite in the Democratic Party, they did not like Mamdani, they did not want to run with Mamdani. But because they have this provision of internal elections and democracy, that they were forced to live with him, that he got the ticket and he ran with it. In India, in the opposition parties, he calls it one-state parties, I call them mom and pop shops, sorry, yeah. Mom and pop shops, and these are dynastic parties. When they're not dynastic, they're in any case extremely centralized. It's run by clique, or the two parties that were reasonably sort of more democratic than the others, even though they did not have elections, internal elections, was the BJP and the communist parties. And now we know how the BJP is run. It has also become like the Congress of the 60s and the 70s. Political parties need to have elections. I mean, this is, this might sound obvious, and there are no major democracies in the world where you have political parties harvesting votes, participating in elections without themselves having internal elections. So unless political parties reinstitute the system of internal elections, there will never be fresh ideas, there will never be fresh talent, and we will just continue to decay the way we are. And also one of the things I would like to add is one of the reasons why political parties are decaying all over the world, and it's not just India, it's a global phenomenon. One of the things that has happened is that the mobilizing arms of the parties, like the trade unions, are withering. And the same has happened in India. You don't see strong trade unions within political parties. Even when they exist, they do not have any leverage within the party. So that also has to be revived. So these are the two basic things that need to be done. And the rest is, of course, will depend on how these play out.
So the problem of party decay, basically a rot that has set in very deeply and is afflicting the range of opposition parties. Ghazala, I wanted you to come in on this, but I was also curious what it is like to live as a Muslim in North India. You're from Agra.
Yes, that's right.
And we know that when the current Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh first took office in 2017, he announced that what Agra is famous for, that ethereal vision that rises, is not representative of Indian culture. So that was a portent of the new era. And I was wondering, what you make of all of that. But feel free to, come in on anything that's being discussed.
I'll talk about the political parties and the opposition first, because I think I have a perspective on my own perspective on that. I feel that when we talk of inter-party democracy, when we talk about weak opposition, we kind of tend to overlook a very important thing or important development that has been happening in India. That is a shift towards an ideological state. None of the Indian opposition parties are driven by any ideology. The Congress party never had an ideology. The only ideology was a freedom movement, the freedom struggle, so they could unite, bring all kinds of people together, because there was a big opposition, there was a big adversary against whom they could unite the people, that was the British. But after that, it had no ideology, which is why when you refer to Govind Ballabh Pant, who used the Ayodhya Ram Temple movement to win the elections in United Provinces, with the help of VHP and Hindu Mahasabha. So all of this was kosher. I mean, all of this was allowed despite the fact that Nehru did rave and rant, but he couldn't do anything, because eventually it was helping with the election result. So our political parties, before the advent of Jansangh and subsequently the BJP, there has never been any ideological movement in India per se. Today we have a very strong ideological movement orchestrated or created by the RSS, which affects or which impacts all aspects of our society. They run thousands and thousands of schools from the primary to higher secondary. They run polytechnics, which do pre-induction training. They run schools, training schools or academies for armed forces. So people do that pre-induction or pre-SSB training in RSS-run academies and then sit for SSB examinations. They do similar kind of training modules for those sitting for civil services, for judiciary, for in every aspect, whether it's a farmers' union, whether it's trade unions, students' union. So this ideological the mooring of our nation has been moving towards Hindutva, has been moving to en masse towards Hindu predominance. And the argument is actually very good, and even I can't argue with this argument why India should not be a Hindu country when Hindus are the majority in this country. When our, immediately after independence and before independence, when the Constituent Assembly was meeting, this was one of the subjects which was widely debated, why India shouldn't be the Hindu version of Pakistan, what stops it. So our entire democracy, the foundations of Indian democracy were based on the idea of few good men at helm. So if Nehru was at helm, he was a good man, secular man, he'll take care of everything. He'll take care of the interests of the Muslims. No Muslim politician, including the tallest Muslim leader who all Muslims revere, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, was a leader of Indians. He was a leader of Muslims. Whereas a person like Nehru was not a leader of Hindus or Kashmiri Hindus. He was a leader of Indians. So no, there has never been any leader from a minority community, not just Muslims, from Sikhs or from Christians, who would be regarded as a leader of Indian people. They were always representative of their communities. So if your democracy, the foundation of your democracy itself was based on religion and religious identity, then how could you imagine, how could anybody imagine that once these good-hearted people, large-hearted people, secular people would not be at the helm, this democracy would function the way they envisaged it would function. Obviously, it could not function like this. Our people, the people who were supposed to be the base of the democracy, the foundation of the democracy, the poor people who go out to vote, people like, drawing room people, rich people, they don't even care who comes to power because they have enough money to see them through. So the poor who actually go out and queue up to vote, they are not represented in those votes. We were talking about UP, not a single Muslim candidate from UP. The Muslim population of UP is 20% of the state. But no representation. Forget Muslims, look at the OBCs. 40% of UP is OBC population, what minuscule representation. The only reason that the Dalits today have reasonable amount of representation is because of reserved constituencies. So maybe this is an idea worth thinking about once again. Maybe we do need reserved constituencies, which was once on the table. Because when you reserved constituencies for Dalits, all parties were forced to field Dalit candidates from those parties. By city, Agra is a reserved constituency now.
SC.
So, yes.
It's an SC seat.
Yes. So, so all parties, they are forced to field SC candidates. So, similarly, why not look at the tribal representation? States of Chhattisgarh, even Madhya Pradesh. The majority in Madhya Pradesh is a tribal population. But what is their representation? So, our democracy has always been a very elite project, run by the elites for the benefits of the elites. Debasish spoke about land reforms. We did not have land reforms because it didn't suit the interests of the elites. Now, you look at crony capitalism, we talk about it very loosely without realizing the monopolies it is creating. We had the Indigo fiasco and then we realized, even in the airlines we have a monopoly here, they can dictate terms to the government. So basically I think our model of democracy itself is very skewed. It is not driven, or it is not meant to empower the weak. It only empowers the already powerful who assume the leadership of the weak, and they they pretend that they care about the weak and the poor. It's not just a question of Muslims, it's a question of everybody. Of course, Muslims face violence on a social level, street level, corporate level, not physical violence at corporate level, but professional violence, emotional violence, harassment. That's a different dimension of our society. But if you're talking of democracy, then this lack of representation is what completely disempowers them, which is why other political parties also have no incentive fielding a Muslim, because they realize that they will not be able to win. Another thing which has crippled our democracy in India is the huge role of money. Whether it's to run a campaign, first of all, to get a ticket, you need substantive money. I mean, you need deep pockets. Then to run a campaign, you need deep pockets. And then to ensure that on the day of polling, the guys who are supposed to vote for you, the people who are supposed to vote for you, they reach the polling booth. You need money for that. You need a huge network. So obviously a community or communities which have traditionally been politically disempowered, economically disempowered, socially disempowered, they cannot afford to participate in the political process. So that's about the democracy. Now, coming to the Muslim question, I think being a Muslim in North India today is about keeping your head down and ensuring that you are not drawing any attention to yourself. So you just try and do what you do. Since I draw a lot in my writing also from my personal life, so I would just narrate a small personal incident, and that is that I'm quite vocal on social media. I'm quite active on Twitter, and I do express my political opinion, I think, very openly without mincing any words. And so a few years back, when there was a backlash, my family is in the business of footwear making. My father, my brother, they're in the leather business. And this is one of the industries in which the Yogi government, when Yogi came to power, they came down very heavily on this industry, forcing a lot of shoe manufacturers to actually shift their factories to even West Bengal. Mm-hmm, yeah. So this was a time when my father actually sat me down and told me, look, maybe you are very bold and you don't care about what is happening to you, but you think about your brother who's running a business here. He lives in Agra, he has a family, he has a daughter, he has a son, a school-going children. So you should not be only thinking about yourself and what people say about you, that some one brave Muslim woman. You should also think about the extended family, because everybody gets affected. And that is the state. If you're doing any work, any business, or even if you're in a corporate job, you are constantly watching behind your shoulders, because you think anything you say which is remotely political, remotely critical of the government can get you in trouble. That itself is the negation of democracy, because democracy gives you the right to criticize your government. If you cannot do that, then it is no longer a democracy.
Can I interject on
Please,
a couple of
please.
things?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Firstly, I would like to agree with her that we don't, there is a serious crisis of ideology when it comes to the opposition. I know what the BJP stands for, or they want to create a Hindu Rashtra, they want to dismantle the inclusive constitution and all of that. But I do not know what the opposition stands for. So that's one thing. But the point that Ghazala makes is that there has been this ideological, in this ideological vacuum, or the BJP has emerged as the one ideological party. I am not completely sold on that, because I think that class-based politics has also been a strong ideological source of mass mobilization. And, like living in North India, I understand, being a Muslim living in North India, you can sometimes, or you can be convinced that the country is moving towards the right. There is a Hinduization of politics, of people, There is a program of mass radicalization after all. But the thing is that if you look at the numbers, or the numbers don't say or don't tell me that the country, that the people are becoming very Hinduized politically. So in all the elections that Modi has won, I think their winning percentages are like 33 and 35% between, right? 30. Yes. Also, like the first one was 33, or the second one, yeah, and then the second one was like
37. Third one is also 37.
Yeah. So if you look at those numbers, that is the percentage of the vote cast. Now, if you consider that 30% of the people did not vote, Modi's vote, the vote for BJP nationally, has never crossed 25%, right? So now if you look at this number and then you say that the entire country is, the people are being Hinduized, or they're moving towards a Hindu ideology, I think number-wise, statistically, that's a tall claim to make. So I think there is a problem somewhere else. And here I will come to another aspect of de-democratization, which we haven't spoken of before. This experts called illiberalism by stealth, or the idea is that people actually do not vote for illiberal forces, or they merely vote for change. So they look for people who they think will be better equipped to govern us, right? And in many countries it has happened. It has happened in Hungary, it has happened in Poland, that they did not vote for a particular person because of his demagogic or dictatorial nature. So a vote for a demagogue is not necessarily a vote for illiberalism. A vote for a demagogue is a vote for change, because people are looking for change. And even in India, if you see, the numbers are not moving that much. It's not like there's we get the sense that there's a Hindu wave, Hindutva wave. Where is the wave? Where are the numbers? The numbers don't tell me there is a wave. If on the other hand, the opposition could create or could throw up an organization and people who could contest the BJP politically, effectively, then you might have a completely different results. So that's what I wanted to define.
That's an incredibly useful contribution, I mean, from both of you. The majoritarianism, ironically, is actually the preserve of a vocal, organized, and highly motivated minority, which is trying to impose its will on everybody else by hook or by crook. Increasingly, more and more by crook, but that's the normal trajectory. I wanted to touch on something else. In this book, which will come out next year, I elaborate a concept I called Hindutva 2.0. Now, I call Hindutva 1.0. If there's a 2.0, there must have been a 1.0. The original mobilization of the 1990s, driven very largely by the Ram Janmabhoomi movement. That was really based on raw, primal majoritarianism. In the Modi era, that raw, primal majoritarianism is still very much there, as we know. In fact, it's absolutely intact. But there have been two other developments. One is the Modi personality cult, the cult of the leader, the cult of the Messiah, who cares so much for the poor and the weak. He has turned that affectation into a fine art. The only comparable precedent in independent India is Indira Gandhi, whose personality cult in the early 1970s lasted only about 2 to 3 years before waning and indeed unraveling quite quickly. The Modi cult has proved to be much more durable by comparison, with the first signs of fatigue apparent only a year and a half ago, when 400 plus ended up as 240, just about. So I was wondering if all three of you have any observations to make on the success and the relative durability, resilience of the Modi cult. And this is completely new, and I think Debasish made this point about the de-democratization of the BJP, that a person of the eminence of Vajpayee, when he was Prime Minister, was the first among equals. Now we have a cabal of two, running the show. And with this overweening Modi personality cult, which is still being plugged, day and night, using every kind of media. The second development, which I think marks out Hindutva 2.0, the Hindutva formula of the Modi era, is precisely this outreach to what I call subaltern Hindus. And that, as we know, I completely agree with Ghazala that it is still an essentially Brahminical outlook, because it's rooted in the RSS. It can't be anything but essentially Brahminical. She knows better than I do that in states like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, it's still an upper caste show. Camouflaged, they've learned to disguise it, and they've constructed a facade, but it's still very much an upper caste show. But at the same time, one can't deny that in the Modi era, even compared to the 1990s, when you had Kalyan Singh, a Lord, and so on, the BJP has been able to pick up support among subaltern Hindu populations that it never had before. And this is the second major development of the Modi era. I was, for example, India Today does twice a year, opinion survey. It's called Mood of the Nation. One doesn't have to accept it at face value with a dose of salt, but I think it's broadly credible. And it showed that fully one half of respondents in North India, the heartland, Hindi heartland states, see Modi, as of 2025, as an outstanding prime minister, the highest possible rating, while only 1/4 of the people in the 5 southern states do. So there's a 2-to-1 kind of discrepancy there. But still, 1 in 4 in South Indian states rate Modi as an outstanding prime minister. Likewise, fully 1/2 of upper caste respondents rated Modi as an outstanding prime minister, okay? And 1/3 of SC respondents, i.e. the lead state. Okay, so again, there's a statistically significant gap between 1/3 and fully 1/2, but 1/3 of Dalits regarding Modi as an outstanding prime minister and most likely voting for him and the BJP is not something insignificant. So I was wondering whether all three of you have any observations on the resilience of the Modi personality cult, which I think his star is waning, but it's still very much there. And even if it's on a gradually downward trajectory, and also this success in the Modi era of picking up subaltern Hindus, which was not the case before. Because I think these two things are huge explanations for the Modi era.
Can I go first?
Sure, of course.
I'll actually go back to 1977 Janata government, when for the first time Jansangh was part of the government. I mean, it dissolved itself, became part of the Janata Party, but for the first time it had a INB ministry post. Advani became the INB minister. Now in that position, I mean, this was a post, or this was a ministry BJS fought for. It demanded this ministry because they wanted the control of the media. So between 1977 to 1980, as a INB minister, Advani placed all his loyalists, all the people committed to the RSS in various positions in different media houses. The consequence of this was that through the decade of the 90s, when the Congress or the Rajiv Gandhi government came to power, when RSS actually supported and brought Rajiv Gandhi government to power in 84, the media was hugely hostile to Rajiv Gandhi government. Any smallest allegation would stick to not only his reputation but to the Congress, and it continues to stick to the Congress party even today, whether it is Bofors, whether it is Shilanyas, or it was opening the doors of Babri Masjid, or reversal of the Shah Bano judgment. All these allegations, they still stick to the Congress party long after Rajiv Gandhi has died. The same media is now, the same journalists are now in the position of influence in different media houses, which is why they ensure that not a single allegation sticks to the Modi government, whether it is Rafale, whether it is demonetization, mismanagement of COVID, crony capitalism, overturning of the Land Reforms Act, overturning of the new Forest Act, Forest Rights Act, which the UPA 2 government had passed. None of these allegations stick. The Farmers Act, CAA, NRC, they are able to do whatever they desire. They are able to bamboozle any kind of laws through the parliament because the media is complicit in them, and the media is complicit not because only it gets money and advertising from the government, but because it is ideologically aligned. We speak about the bold and courageous journalism of the Indian Express. Where is that bold and courageous journalism any longer? It was courageous, it was bold as long as the Congress was in power. The moment the BJP government has come in power, you see the exposes Indian Express, a newspaper like Indian Express does. No political expose. They're not talking, they do not touch Modi, they do not touch Shah. And they are the first newspaper or mainline newspaper in India to give space to the RSS ideologues, to give columns to RSS ideologues, both Ram Madhav and before that, I'm forgetting the name, Govindacharya.
Rakesh Sinha.
Rakesh Sinha, and Govindacharya before him, who was now in oblivion. So widespread dissemination of RSS ideologies through a mainline newspaper. Other newspapers until the 80s used to think that we should not encourage RSS people in mainline newspapers, not any longer. So this goes back to the 77. The other thing that we were talking about, the BJP or Modi's is appeal amongst the subaltern Hindus. I think for this we'll have to go further back in history, and we have to go back to Lokmanya Tilak to mobilize ordinary Hindus of Maharashtra. They started the Ganpati Puja. It had no religious significance, it was mobilization. So you use a festival, a religious festival, to mobilize the subaltern, to mobilize people who actually form a mob. We can eventually form a mob. And this is what Hegrebar, the entire early RSS leadership came from Maharashtra. This is the lesson they learned, that to mobilize the weakest, you need to give them something that is of interest to them, which is by several yatras. Now in the Hindi heartland, we have yatras like even Hanuman Yatra, which was unheard of. We have Valmiki Yatra, we have all kinds of yatras. It's not just Ram Navami Yatra, or not just Navratre or Kavad Yatra. All kinds of yatras now happen. Once a month there is some yatra, and who are the foot soldiers who take out these yatras? Who are the guys who shout provocative slogans, or who are listening to this, what is called now Hindutva pop? Who are the guys? They are all subalterns. They are OBCs, they are Dalits. And this outreach, I know in the course of research for my book in the Hindi Heartland, I spoke to a large number of Dalit people, especially from Western UP, who have been the beneficiaries of land reforms in UP. UP was one of the states where actually land reforms happened, and they all got land. So communities like Jatavs, communities like Chamars, they are landholders, and they draw their power from land. They are the ardent supporters of Modi. Despite being Dalits, they are the first ones to carry out yatras. They are the first ones to carry out violence against Muslims, against Christians. They are the vandals. They form the mobs. So this empowerment of the Dalits or the subalterns has happened through series of yatras which they think is something which empowers them. You see this cover yatra, I don't know how many people in Bengal are even aware of this yatra. It's pardon my saying this, but it has a huge nuisance value. But you see the DGP of UP, he gets in a helicopter to shower flower petals, rose petals on the yatris. So who are the people who undertake this yatra? Almost 70% of them are Dalits. And then there are OBCs. Brahmins don't undertake this yatra. Kshatriyas, Rajputs, Bhumihars, they don't undertake this yatra. So they draw their power, the street power. Half of them are on drugs when they undertake this yatra because it's hugely laborious. It's very painful. This whole process of carrying, walking this huge distance. For some people, it's as long as 800 kilometers to fetch the waters from Ganga and bring it back to their villages. And in humidity, July, it's a terribly humid month. So, and they can't rest, they can't put the covers on the ground. So they have to constantly carry it, and some of them carry up to 30, 35 kilos on their shoulders. So it's a very painful process. So to sustain themselves, they take all kinds of hashish or whatever. And it's all recorded. I mean, it's reported, widely reported, the drug abuse that happens during the yatra. But they draw their power through this. So this is the appeal of this is the way in which they are mobilizing people, and they are turning more and more towards Hindutva. Because Ambedkar said, he turned his back towards Hinduism, but this outreach of the BJP through the RSS shakhas in most of North Indian villages now, they are turning the Dalits into more pious Hindus than even the Brahmins. There's a growing tendency of vegetarianism amongst Dalits. They're quitting eating non-vegetarian food because they've been told that if it is non-veg which gives you this lower status. So if you want purification, you give up non-vegetarian food. There is a huge tendency about ritualism amongst Dalits, which was never there. In most of North India, ritual worship was not as prominent as, worshipping of their local deities, Gram Devtas. But all of this is changing now because of this outreach, and that is where the appeal of the Prime Minister lies, because they now look upon him as Karma Yogi, Mahapurush, and all of that.
Yeah, about the subaltern outreach, of course, there's decades of very meticulous and systematic RSS work of uplift and indoctrination at the same time among subaltern groups. And there's been a payoff from that.
Yes.
And separately, it also helps that the BJP is in power continuously for 11 and a half years at the center and in at least half the states, including most of the major states.
Yes.
So patronage resources are much more. So, they're just there at the disposal. And about the Modi personality cult, cracking that particular puzzle, its resilience, I think there may be, my suspicion is there may be a very mundane explanation for it at the end of the day. The lack of any plausible competition. Yeah. So, but Debasish. And then Professor Sugata Bose. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, we'll do it ourselves. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is, I see it more as an extension of the thing that I was mentioning, the phenomenon of illiberalism by surprise or by stealth, is that people come to power, like Modi came to power on Sabka Saath, Sabke Vikas. He didn't run on a ticket of Hindu Rashtra or savaging of Muslim lives. He came, and people voted for him. And then once these demagogues come to power, they systematically erode the institutions, or they hollow them out. That's what has happened in Poland, that's what has happened in Hungary, that's what is happening in India. So Modi 2.0 is looking a lot worse than Modi 1.0 because they have managed to capture more of the institution. And the way to respond to that, or the proper response to that, is to throw up real choice for the people, which the opposition has failed to do, which is why I have increasingly become disillusioned with the way the opposition functions in India, because to me, like, I don't know if you have come across my writings on the opposition. I have been writing about the need to boycott elections and launch civil disobedience movement. If you really believe that the votes are being stolen, as the opposition parties have been claiming, and if you really think that people are being disenfranchised, if you go to the parliament, you cannot fight for your bills. You're given like 3 minutes to speak, and you are never allowed to make any substantive point. There is no deliberation in parliament. So I don't understand how long and why the opposition continues to or take part in a process which is clearly not helping our democracy. And so this is a point that I have been making, and of course people have made the counterpoint that if you boycott, if you do not take part in the elections, if you stand apart, then these people will consolidate power even more. But again, I would beg to differ on that, and I think that one of the ways that the opposition can reinvent itself, regenerate itself, is by really taking the battle to the streets. There is no point in continuing to continue to pretend that it's business as usual, and that is exactly what the opposition is doing. We live in very unusual times, and the opposition has to look at unusual modes of regeneration, which it hasn't yet.
Actually, there's a problem there too, because the opposition today lacks a rallying figure. The role that Jayaprakash Narayan played in the mid-1970s, and even Vishwanath Pratap Singh played in the late 1980s. Sugata Bose?
I'll just say a word or two about what I have learned from Ghazala and Debashish's analysis of the condition and prospects of democracy. Now, if we are to hope for the sun to set on the Modi era in 2029, I think we need ideological clarity and commitment on the part of the opposition. That, I think, is crystal clear, that against an ideological formation of the Sangh Parivar, you need a coherent, ideologically driven challenge. And just earlier today, I was reading the proofs of a new edition of Subhash Chandra Bose's Torunesh Swapno, which will be released on the 23rd of January next month. And there was one particular speech given in October 1929 which struck me. The rest of the country was talking about the Purna Swaraj resolution that would be brought in a couple of months' time. And of course, Subhash Chandra Bose had been demanding that for far longer than the other leaders of the Congress. But Subhash Chandra Bose used a very different phrase. Well, in association with Purna Swaraj, he called for Purno Sammyavad, Purna Samyavada, and it was a crystal clear analysis of an egalitarian ideology that addressed all of the fractures of class, caste, gender. And we are talking about, 1929. It is that degree of ideological clarity that we need. And also, of course, the 1920s had been the heyday of Indian anti-colonial political thought on genuine federalism. How are we going to replace the British Raj with a genuine and substantive federal union of the Indian peoples. So these are the sorts of ideological clarity and commitment that would be needed. I understand your point, Debashish, about also the need for popular movements. You're basically calling for a satyagraha. But we should also remember that even Gandhian satyagraha could not be sustained for very long. If you think about 1920 to 22, you know, as soon as he called off the satyagraha, the whole campaign of boycotting the very inadequate British representative institutions had to be brought to an end. The Swaraj Party had to say that we will go into these representative institutions and direct the reforms from within. So I don't think it's an either or. I really do think that there needs to be a campaign of satyagraha for popular mobilization, but it also has to be directed towards winning back a mandate through democratic political processes. And a final quick comparative point, I don't entirely agree with you on the United States of America. Of course, I was also very enthused when Mamdani, with his honest ideological position, was able to win a local election in New York. But I don't think that, and of course the Americans have the primary process, but the problem in America has been the Democratic Party's political establishment. And it has not allowed, generally speaking, this is an exception in New York, to have truly popular politicians with bases of social support to emerge as the real challengers. I teach young people, and I have seen in 2016, 2020, my students being really excited about Bernie Sanders, but who did not have a chance because the Democratic political party establishment would not put him up against Trump. And so I disagree with my compatriots, Levitsky and Ziblatt, who says that in order to restore American democracy after Trump, the Republican Party needs to be reformed and needs to rediscover itself. My own view is that it is the Democratic Party which needs to be reformed and to be made genuinely democratic if there is to be a restoration of genuine democracy in the United States of America. And so similarly, I think there is a lot of work to do on the part of opposition parties in India, on the ideological front, on the organizational front, and it is only a combination of satyagraha and mobilization to effectively fight elections that will deliver us in the foreseeable future from this scourge of majoritarian tyranny.
Right, I think we probably should take a couple of interventions from the floor. Yeah, it seems we close at 8 o'clock, but let me, in a couple of minutes, sum up. It echoes some of the points that have already been made. There is clearly an ideological civilizational state project underway in India. And that civilizational state project, with its own narrative of history, with its own definition and formulation of the meaning and the essence of Indian identity, has widespread support. Certainly, Modi didn't come to power in 2014 campaigning on Hindu Rashtra. He was much cleverer than that. But you made a very important point, Debashish, that there is this typical strongman trajectory. Once they win more than one election, once they're entrenched in power, the behavior shifts, and so does the agenda. And what's been happening since 2014 is that the BJP has been setting the agenda. It defines the issues and the parameters and the opposition spectrum is at best reactive, and even then in a haphazard manner. I end this book, although it's not my job to dispense unsolicited advice, with a 3-point charter for the salvation and the renewal of Indian democracy, in 3 points. That an ideologically driven project needs an ideological response. It needs an effective ideological challenge, a counter, which means an alternative vision of Indian national identity and of Indian nationalism, which unequivocally rejects, repudiates the Hindutva framing of Indian nationalism and Indian national identity. And that is a colossal failure of our spectrum of opposition parties. The Congress, as we know, has a long and electorally failed record of copycat Hindutva or soft Hindutva. And some of the one-state parties have started emulating that era. So that was the first point of my charter, a robust ideological response, an alternative vision of nationalism. Secondly, Debasish made this very important point of how dangerous these strongmen are, these despots are, once they get entrenched. And that's a lesson not just from our country, but in Europe, in the Americas, in the North and South, from Trump in the North to Milei in Argentina, and others in between, that one should get out of this, one should contest this very tempting search for messianic figures, the savior complex, okay, which is profoundly dangerous. And rejection of this strongman brand of politics, of this personality cult-driven form of politics, leader-centered model of politics, which is so profoundly dangerous, and a renewed emphasis on institutions and their survival and their resurgence. I would like to mention that India's parliament, which is the bedrock institution of our democracy, is in grave risk, if it hasn't already become that, of becoming a rubber stamp and a cavernous echo chamber in this gaudy new complex that they have inaugurated 2 years ago. This is something that greatly disturbed Krishna Bose in her last years, as someone who was a veteran parliamentarian, who took our parliamentary system of government incredibly seriously. And one must, if Indian democracy is to be nursed back to any state of health, parliamentary supremacy, the substantive role and relevance of Parliament has to be restored. That must be a top priority, and that's where the strongman model, the Messiah, the Savior, gets in the way. And of course there are other institutions, the integrity of the Fourth Estate, which is hopelessly compromised, okay? Or the independence of the judiciary, which I think is up for grabs. We have a lecture in 2 weeks' time in this auditorium by Justice S. Muralidhar on the current relationship in India between the judiciary and the legislature. And finally, to echo a point that's been made, I think the third point of this charter of salvation and renewal must be not just protecting, but responsibly enhancing the decentralized character of the Indian Union. And by that, I don't just mean the autonomy of states, although that is a very important pillar of our political architecture. I also mean robust bicameralism at the center to replace the weak bicameralism that we have right now with an indirectly elected Rajya Sabha with limited powers. There should be much more consensual, broadly based decision-making at the political center through robust bicameralism in Parliament, and that will also lead to a rejuvenation of Parliament, contribute to that. Why is this so important? It's so important because the essence and the goal of the Modi-Shah brand of politics is the centralization and concentration of power. in a cabal of two. So anything that supports decentralization, diffusion of power, and deconcentration of power is healthy for Indian democracy. Anything that goes against this centralization of power, which is a colonial inheritance, and its latest incarnation, which is the concentration of power in a cabal of two. So that's my concluding 2 cents worth. Let's have a couple of quick interventions, and then we can wind up. We have about, we can spend 5 minutes or so. Shuranjan Das, Professor Shuranjan Das would like to say something. ঠিক আছে. We'll take it as a bunch of questions.
Could I first compliment the panelists for this wonderful panel discussion? I would like to raise 3 quick points for consideration. Now, the authoritarian, centralized authoritarian trend and divisive politics that all the panelists mentioned in the context of India, isn't it true that we see the same trend in all those African and other Asian countries which won independence in the context of decolonization? Take Kenya after Kenyatta, take South Africa after Nelson Mandela, take Congo, Libya, Nigeria, Mali, etc. And in Asia, of course, we have the examples of Myanmar, Indonesia, Pakistan, etc. Why is this? Can it be related to the particular form of decolonization which resulted in the independence of these states? We need to ponder. Secondly, about Sumantra effectively made a point that we cannot just stop at blaming one particular party for the growth of religious majoritarianism. We need also to analyze the failure of the left and secular forces. Why did they fail? If one party can establish schools and other things, why the other parties who are supposed to be ideologically opposed to it has not been able to do so? I believe that to a large extent, this has been because of the dichotomies inherent within the national movement. There are instances of leaders shuttling between the Congress and Hindu Mahasabha. There are instances of leaders shuttling with the Congress and the Muslim League. And there are also examples of how even during Nehru's period, we have the examples of the growth of centralizing posture of the Indian state. Take, for example, the way the Kerala government was unseated. Take, for example, his tacit approval of Mrs. Gandhi becoming the Congress president. Take, for example, what happened after Tandon became the Congress president, and almost one is reminded of what happened after Netaji became the Congress president despite Mahatma Gandhi's protest. We need also to understand that although we talk of the pursuit of socialism under Nehru, recent studies have shown it was during Nehru's period there was a substantial participation of private capital and even foreign monopoly capital during the Nehruvian period. So there were distortions within the post-colonial period of the Congress, which I think we need to take into consideration to explain why this particular phase of politics we are in. Finally, I am not quite at ease to create separate electorates for the Muslims. I do not think the religious identity is similar to ethnic or caste identity. The two, I think, are qualitatively different. And if we go in for religious-based constituencies, we are definitely in for trouble. So we need to give a careful thought on it. And the final point, the point was made that in a democracy, that we see in India, it is for the state is run in favor of the people at the power, the powerful people, the economically powerful people, the politically powerful people. Unfortunately, even in America and Europe, this is happening. We can, as Sugata mentioned about Sanders, we see how the two major political parties in America are completely being usurped by the financial lobbies. When I was a student in Oxford, I had the opportunity to work very closely with the Labour Party. And I saw how money plays, even in elections in Britain. So unless political democracy goes hand in hand with economic democracy, this will happen. This we see in India, this we see in other parts of the world. So these were the 3 points that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shuranjanda. A very brief response. The difference between us and various other countries is that we were supposed to be the world's largest democracy until not very long ago. And that halo has somewhat slipped. Because 2 of our panelists have a background in journalism, I should mention that in 2025, the organization Reporters Without Borders rates India as 151st of 180 countries on the Press Freedom Index, an annual rating. But we've been improving because we were 159th in 2024 and 161st in 2023. So, well, small mercies. Someone else? Or Pradeep Kakkar? Yeah, please.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. One, strong agreement with the idea of civil disobedience movement. I think, given the fact that the opposition's failure has really been shortchanging of the electorate, I think, and also given the demonstrated success of the farmers' protest, I think the idea of a civil disobedience movement certainly needs to be encouraged. But one point that came up that I'm not sure I agree with is the need for an ideology. I think when you look at today's electorate's exposure to social media, and you look at the incredible amount of money which the BJP has, and you combine the two, and you see the implications of the use of social media through bots, through fake accounts, and the influence that that can have on people. I don't know if we should replace the fourth estate with a view which says that social media is the way to go if you've got the kind of money that the BJP seems to be garnering. So just the last comment on Mamdani. I think one aspect of Mamdani's success that gets overlooked is his direct outreach, and that to some extent links with the point on social media. I think Mamdani did not, despite his professions of being a socialist, etc., I don't think he actually had much of an ideology. What he had was relevant issues which he focused on and drove home very successfully through direct contact. And I think that's a lesson that we need to transfer to the opposition here. Please be relevant and please respect people and spend time conveying what the message is to the people. And I think whether it's through social media or the kind of model that Mamdani has demonstrated, that would be the way to go. Perhaps civil disobedience would be a good trigger occasionally with that.
Thank you, Mr. Kakkar. Shaheen Bagh was an example of civil mobilization. December 2019 to February 2020, cut short by the pandemic. We don't know where it would have led. Yes, yes, please, Miguel, yeah.
Good evening. As a New Yorker, I could not help but comment on Mamdani. And my comment is that Mamdani didn't win because of his outreach or the way he approached the election, or about his ideological coherence. Mamdani won in New York because he won in New York. New York is an exception. He would not have won in Oklahoma City. He would not have won in Seattle. He won in New York. And in answering the question about what does the opposition globally stand for against illiberalism, I think the New York example may provide an answer. New York is the most multicultural, most global, most interlinked city in the United States and probably in the world. And to me, the reason that he won so solidly partly because he bucked the political elite, but he, in a way, answered a very important question that the opposition generally hasn't answered and that the illiberal forces are answering, which is, how do we deal with globalization? How do we deal with illegal migrants? How do we deal with climate change? How do we deal with criminality on a global scale? And to a large extent, the illiberal representatives of the world have clothed themselves in their flags and have put a wall, literally, and said, this is the answer. We're going to raise tariffs, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Basically, we're going to wrap ourselves in our own little enclave, in our own little castles, and protect ourselves from this force that's called globalization. So my question is the answer to developing a conviction for the opposition, for the forces for liberalism, does that require an answer to globalization? Does the Democratic Party in the United States or the Congress Party, whatever you describe as the opposition to liberalism on a global scale, are they answering that question? And my suspicion is that they're not. They avoided the issue, and that's why they're losing.
Please, Debasish, respond. Yeah, you've taken 3 from the floor.
I will touch on all 3 of. I will touch on something that was raised by all 3 of you. One is the need for ideology. Now, coming to globalization, globalization did not work for a lot of people in the West, but globalization worked for India. So Indians here, anti-globalization as like an anti-globalization line in politics will not sell because we have gained a lot from globalization. So what we need is an ideology on part of the opposition. Now here is the problem. The problem is not the globalization. The problem is the consensus between labor and capital. This is the main problem. What has happened in India is there has been a neoliberal consensus, and all political parties have bought into that consensus, especially the Congress, which brought in neoliberalization. So the only way to counter identity politics is class politics, which is what Mamdani did in his in New York. This has become impossible in India because we have all political parties have agreed that market is supreme, that capital has to be privileged over labor. Now, once you reach that consensus, you cannot take a socialist line. You cannot talk about labor rights. You cannot talk about taxing the billionaires, because the billionaires are our saviors. They bring investment. And every state government, they hold these huge enclaves every year to invite the billionaires. We make headlines of how much a billionaire is investing in a particular state. So the whole public consensus has agreed, there is a consensus on the supremacy of capital over labor. And this is why we cannot have a class-based counter movement. And this is the problem. This is the moment that we find ourselves in India today. That the only question to identity, religious identity or your birth-based identity, is your class identity. But you cannot really organize your politics around class, because that would mean or that you would have to make a break with the neoliberal consensus.
I wanted to comment on civil disobedience movement. And my contention is that in post-independence India, the only mass movements that have succeeded are the ones which have been behind the scenes, at least orchestrated by the RSS. whether it was the Lohiya movement of 1967, whether it was a JP movement of the 1970s, or whether it was an India against corruption movement which displaced the UPA 2 government, or the Nirbhaya. I don't like using the word Nirbhaya. Her name is Jyoti Singh, so I would say Jyoti Singh. The protests that broke out after her brutalization and killing. All of them were spearheaded, at least if not on the forefront, behind the scenes by the RSS. The Shaheen Bagh protest was limited in time and space. Even if COVID had not happened, there were signs that the BJP government in Delhi was already trying to, in cooperation with the AAP government, trying to derail the movement. The movement was not widespread, it was limited to certain pockets in Delhi. There were token protests in Azad Maidan in Bombay, some token protests in Bangalore, but the sit-down protest, continuous protest, was orchestrated only by Muslims and nobody else, because everybody else regarded the laws as affecting the Muslims, not affecting the country. So that protest could not have grown, even if there was no COVID. The farmers' protest, again, limited in time and space, and did not last long, ended with violence, as Shaheen Bagh ended in violence, and so that protest also could not sustain. So I think it's a very nice idea to talk about mass protest, mass movement of people against the government, mass mobilization, but I do not see that happening because there aren't enough stakeholders. People who would lead the mass movement can easily be bought over by the other side because they have enough money, they have muscles, and they are the ones which are also trying to work ideologically on the masses, which could be the bulwark for a movement.
I would beg to differ with you, Ghazala. I don't think that the CA, NRC, the anti-CA, NRC movement was entirely driven by Muslims. I have traveled all over India. I met a lot of people during that time who were Hindus, who were Christians, young people, professionals, college goers, who came out and spontaneously opposed CNRC. And like that was not behind the scenes, the RSS was not controlling the CNRC movement, it was a spontaneous national movement. So I would not discount the possibility of mass movement out of hand.
No, I don't want to argue on that, but what I have seen is that it was led by Muslims, spearheaded by them, sustained by them, and they bore the brunt of it. The evidence is continuous incarceration of student leaders, majority of whom are Muslims.
The biggest example of a mass mobilization is Ram Janmabhoomi.
Yes.
And yes.
No, first of all, it's been an extraordinarily rich conversation, and we really are most grateful to both Ghazala and Debashish. I'll give a brief historian's answer to the historian's questions. I agree with all 3 points made by Shuranjanda, but I would say that there is new historical work that is being done about what may be called post-imperial possibilities. You know, there were very creative and innovative political and economic ideas that did not win during the post-colonial transition for state power. You mentioned Africa. There are historians like Fred Cooper and Jane Burbank, or there are others who are working on the entire Atlantic world like Adam Getachew, who are suggesting that we actually need to rediscover some of those ideas which we were not able to seize upon in the immediate years and decades after independence. As a result, what we see is a long inheritance of colonial authoritarianism in the post-colonial states of Africa and Asia. And there is a younger generation of historians of South Asia who are doing similar work. In intellectual history, they are producing a new history of political and economic ideas that is of direct salience to the problem of democracy versus authoritarianism, or the spectrum that stretches from democracy to authoritarianism in contemporary times. A word about the need for ideology. That point is simply being made because nationalism still has an enormous appeal. Whether here in India we have Hindutva nationalism, whether in the United States of America, if you look at the MAGA movement, Make America Great Again, and it is in that context that we cannot abandon the domain of nationalist ideology. That, there can be more generous, more enlightened visions of national identity and nationalism. That's the only way that one can challenge those versions of nationalism which are narrow, selfish, arrogant, and which are based on prejudice and bigotry against all kinds of vulnerable minorities. So that's the case for, ideology. I can understand you are talking about focusing on issues. I know that Mamdani was razor-like on his concentration on the problem of affordability in New York. And that had a certain kind of a resonance. But he also did something else which we can learn from, but we have to do it on a national scale. He went to the voters who had turned to Trump and got them back, disenchanted working class voters who then, voted for him. They hadn't voted for the Democratic Party establishment. And here too, even if the BJP has had something between 31 to 37% of the vote share, that is a tremendous advantage to have if the next best party is down at 19%.
So 2-1.
And therefore, we need to make sure that one wins back voters who have been, lost or have been seduced away, often with promises of welfare and so forth, a kind of patronage politics that has taken hold in our country. So I would still say that there is hope at the realm of ideas. Some of the political battles have to be fought in the realm of ideas and then, put into practical application.
I agree that we are better than this, and we can do better than this. A very brief response, one sentence to Miguel. I completely agree that Mamdani Jr., Mamdani Sr. being the professor at Columbia, won because he excellently tailored his strategy to the local context. And though some of these one-state parties, for all their limitations, flaws, and vices, are also good at that. Unlike the Congress, by and large, which is a very top-down outfit, the one-state parties are closer to the ground. If you look at the electoral history of India in the last decade, in the Modi era, the BJP actually has a very mixed record against one-state parties, especially in state elections. And that's because the one-state parties are sometimes really good at tailoring their strategies to the local context. But their great limitation is that they are one-state parties. How can we replicate that same strategy nationwide? That seems to be very elusive and indeed out of reach. We have, as of now, we have a ritual. We present our guest speakers with a selection of books. Can I ask Professor Sugata Bose, the chairperson of Netaji Research Bureau, to present Ghazala Wahab and Debasish Roy Chowdhury with a selection of Krishna Bose's books. One of them is the autobiography of her early life, especially growing up in late colonial India during the last decade of British rule. and in the early years of independent India, called Lost Addresses. Another one is her memoir of her political life, her stint in active partisan politics, called An Outsider in Politics, which I referred to already. And the third is a nationally best-selling collection of her lifetime of articles and essays on Netaji Subhash Bose and his life of struggle for India's freedom and renewal as a nation. This has been a 2-hour discussion, and you've been an exemplary audience. We have recorded this session. We will put it on our YouTube channel and make sure it gets around, because I think it is a discussion that will be of profit to those who care about India's present and even more about India's future. We have an event 2 weeks from now on the Saturday, 10th January, when, as I think I mentioned, Justice S. Muralidhar will speak on the current relationship between the judiciary and the legislature in India, but that's 2 weeks from now. And may I invite all of you at the conclusion of the Krishna Bose Symposium 2025 to partake of a steaming cup of coffee before you depart the premises of Netaji Bhavan. Thank you for coming. Good evening. Jai Hind.